have no regrets about publishing the study?
Oh, I don't have any regrets about publishing at all. It generated all sorts of useful discussion, which is the purpose of a scholarly journal.
Inside GSK, though, the discussion was all about what a failure Study 329 had been. This is what another of its PR people wrote when asked if the journal article would be publicised.
Originally, we had planned to do extensive media relations surrounding this study until we actually viewed the results. Essentially, this study did not really show it was effective in treating adolescent depression, which is not something we want to publicize.
The same month the journal article was published, the third of the company's clinical trials in depressed children reported back. Would this one back up the company's public claims for Seroxat? Not at all. It actually showed the children on Seroxat did worse than the ones on sugar pills. Yet doctors at this time asking GSK for advice on treating children were told that Study 329 showed the drug
was superior to placebo by several assessment methods.
No mention of the serious side effects or the 2 failed studies. Meanwhile, GSK was telling its American sales reps who promote drugs direct to doctors that Seroxat
demonstrates remarkable efficacy and safety in the treatment of adolescent depression.
They have been deceiving the population, the doctors, everybody, and I think what they've done is just despicable. I'm very, very angry, and it's an anger I don't often know what to do with.
They didn't tell the regulators or the physicians or parents about these risks or the lack of efficacy. Instead, they went out and promoted this specific study as remarkably effective and safe for kids.
So what does that amount to in your view?
That's a lie. That's fraud.
This was a drug that doctors were told could help prevent suicide, when, in reality, it was actually making some children suicidal. A triumph of marketing over science. Nearly 5 years ago, I started asking questions about Seroxat's safety in children after reports of worrying side effects in adults. So, did GSK and its supporters come clean about what they knew, or continue to cover up the truth? Back in 2002, I interviewed another academic paid by GSK to work on Study 329. Dr. Neil Ryan is an eminent child psychiatrist. He was speaking at an American medical conference sponsored by, yes, GlaxoSmithKline. Dr. Ryan told an audience that included British doctors Seroxat was effective for childhood depression. He didn't mention the small issue of suicide. So afterwards, I asked him about it.
It looks like, in fact, that the antidepressants overall lower the rate of suicide rather than raise it. I mean, it's been a question that's really important because it's such an awful outcome. You can't treat people that are dead, you know. But it's looking like it's not the case.
I wondered even then how he could be so sure. Back in Britain, I called him.
I'm trying to find some more information about it from you, because I know you were one of the main authors, and I think you had access to all the data. So this issue,
I've given you what I can give you, Shelley. Good luck with your story.
You can't tell me whether the children were self-harming or trying to kill themselves. Hello? Hung up again.
Fast forward 4 years, and the boxes in Malibu reveal what was going on behind the scenes. This supposedly independent academic was asking the company that sponsored his research how to respond to me.
If you look here, he emails all of your correspondence to GlaxoSmithKline. I'll call you again later today, and you can advise on how might be best to handle this. That's somebody from GlaxoSmithKline, so he's forwarded all my emails to them and asked for advice. Yeah, you see that they are truly, these academics are truly spokespersons for the drug company.
Back in 2003, I eventually spoke to a senior GSK executive. And despite what the company was admitting internally, the message for the outside world was that Study 329 was absolutely sound.
The evidence here suggests that their children might be at more risk of suicide if they go on Seroxat.
No, the evidence is not there. There is no statistical difference between the groups. The reality of the situation is that in this trial, Seroxat was generally well tolerated by this difficult-to-treat population.
That simply wasn't true. After the programme, a staggering 67,000 people contacted us with their own Seroxat stories.
I did attempt suicide a couple of times. I just put the point to my arms and just scrape until it bled. I would cut myself with razors. I did just want to die.
I kept pursuing the story, but 6 months later, Dr. Benbow still wouldn't budge.
These medicines are not linked with suicide. These medicines are not linked with an increased rate of self-harm.
Professor David Healy is an academic who has long challenged the company line. He's angry that doctors were deceived into prescribing a harmful drug to children.
If you'd heard the experts talk, they all said the drug was extremely safe and very effective. We were all hoodwinked, misled, duped. They produced these clinical trials which appear to be evidence, and they aren't. They're adverts.
Cherise Gatchell's doctor, like thousands of others, prescribed Seroxat in good faith.
Cherise was prescribed Seroxat on the 7th of May 2003. On the 11th, the Panorama program was broadcasted. We watched it together. We called her and said, "Come and look. Look, Seroxat, you see? You shouldn't have been on it. Aren't we lucky that you're off it?" We didn't realize she was taking it secretly again.
The following month, some dramatic news.
Government's drug safety advisors have warned that the antidepressant drug Seroxat shouldn't be given to anyone under 18 years old.
The reason? Seroxat trebles the risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviour in depressed children. The medicines regulator had worked this out from the secret clinical trial data GSK had finally handed over, 2 years after the last depression study had ended. But it didn't come in time for Cherise Gatchell.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. 2 weeks after she died. Why not just 3 weeks earlier, then, or 4 weeks earlier? We wouldn't have had that problem. Everything came too late for Cherise.
GlaxoSmithKline didn't want to be interviewed, but told us the company utterly rejects any suggestion it has improperly withheld drug trial information, and points out that Seroxat has never been approved for under 18s. GSK rightly says that no suicides were reported in the children's studies, and claims none of the individual trials were considered by GSK or independent investigators to show a clinically meaningful increase in the rate of suicidal thinking or attempted suicide. But the boxes in Malibu reveal that the company did find a clinically meaningful increase in 2004 when forced by the US medicines regulator to go back through its own trial results. Miraculously, they discovered a further 4 children on Seroxat who had become suicidal during study 329.
They discovered that there was actually a 6-fold increase in events related to suicide.
But how could all of this be missed originally? I mean, these people were academics, they were supposed to be objective, and they were supposed to be scrutinising the data.
It shows that they didn't.
In an email exchange I've seen, the supposedly independent investigators seem surprised by this news. Dr. Ryan tells Professor Keller that, unfortunately, the extra suicidal cases were all on Seroxat, or Paxil as it's known in the States. Dr. Ryan was recently asked about this while giving video evidence.
Did you go back and correct your paper? The GSK was getting the data out there, so it wasn't there was no erratum to the paper. Okay. This was a subsequent analysis.
That's fine. I just want so no erratum to your paper. To your paper's been done to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, not.
Toronto last summer. 15,000 psychiatrists from Britain and around the world are here for the profession's largest annual conference. The whole event is sponsored by the big drug companies. And Martin Keller, the key opinion leader, is here doing what he does best, influencing medical opinion. We weren't allowed to film his speech, so wired with a secret camera, I caught up with him afterwards to ask if he was worried about the high number of suicide attempts on Study 329.
None of these attempts led to suicide, and very few of them led to hospitalization. The thing is, you have to consider what are the alternatives. Right? So
well, some of the unpublished studies showed that placebo actually seemed to have more of an effect.
Hang on, rewind a second. Yep, he really did just stroke me under the chin.
So you still stand by it? You'd be quite happy to still prescribe?
Absolutely. I think, yeah.
We're in a situation now where people who are ill generally have been deeply betrayed by the whole process, deeply betrayed by the pharmaceutical companies and by all the experts that have been willing to actually lend their names to the process.
Do you think what happened with Study 329 actually matters in a broader context?
I think what it tells us is that we do have a problem. We know that it's not the only case, and we have to work very hard not only to uncover cases such as this, but to work out how to prevent things like this happening in the future.
This scandal shows just how tightly the drug companies control medical research. In the US, bereaved families have joined together to sue GSK, claiming it acted fraudulently. The case should come to court later this year, and if it succeeds, the company could be forced to pay out millions of dollars to the families.
Mr. Scott, 14 years old. This is a little boy who's 11 years old. He started taking Seroxat, and he ended up, he hanged himself in the closet with the leash of his new pet puppy.
Stephanie Gatchell and her husband have moved away from the home that holds so many awful memories to try to start a new life in Ireland. But they just can't forgive GSK for concealing what it knew about Seroxat.
They just kept on denying and denying and denying. I mean, a program like Panorama virtually had to force them to admit. When were they ever going to come out with the truth on their own? I don't think so. The decision makers in that company should be brought to justice. They have a lot to explain.